Going to discuss Surah Al-Waqi'ah, and it's Surah number 56 in the Quran. So for those who want to tag along, and basically we're going to go over the surah and dissect it together. And we were saying a few weeks ago when we were dissecting Surah Maryam, I was saying if you consider each surah like an ocean that you can dive into and extract gems out of. So this is what we're going to do with Surah Al-Waqi'ah, and we can go over the ayat together, and then at the end we can have like a discussion points, inshallah. But basically, we all know people who've had doubts before, religious doubts, and this is something very normal, and it's happened from the Prophet ﷺ's time. In our time, it's nothing new. I'm sure many of you, even in your families or even yourselves, have had doubts where you're questioning, why is this happening to me, or is Allah Ta'ala real, or is this real? How do I know the truth, and things like that. And this surah is so on point in its really nailing what Allah Ta'ala is, and how He's proving His abilities over and over again in this surah so powerfully. And from the start of this surah, it basically makes you thirsty for more. It's like, I want to know more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what's happening, and then it quenches your thirst at the end. At the end of it, it's so beautifully put together that it leaves you at peace. If you're really reading the surah with an open mind, inshallah you'll come back and you'll have clear doubts. You'll clear all your doubts, inshallah. So before we dive into the surah, I want you to keep in mind when the surah was revealed. It was revealed in the early Meccan period. And at this time, a lot of people, the polytheists, they weren't used to the concept of tawheed, of one ilah, of one God. So you can see that in the tone and the content of the way that the surah is worded. Immediately, it's addressing their doubts right away. And it's giving them the sense of urgency, like, come back to Allah Ta'ala, know Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. It has a sense of urgency in the tone. And also one thing to add is that poetry was big at that time. Poetry was huge. Everybody would use poetry, even the polytheists, the people who are not Muslim, they would use poetry as a hobby. And here Allah Ta'ala is using poetry to get to them. The surah is so eloquently worded. And when you look at it, there's so much imagery, there's so much description, and it captivates you. And so Allah knows His target audience, and He's really, really getting to their level in terms of how to get them to understand the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want you to think, some of you are students, I'm sure some of you have studied before, or even some of you may enjoy reading books or writing. When you think of an essay or a perfectly worded book, you always see that the best books are the ones that really captivate you, from beginning to end. They leave, the reader on cliffhangers, and they really have so many details, and also they're very structured in their content. And I remember growing up, the Quran is also beautifully worded altogether, but this specific surah, Surah Al-Waqi'ah, surah number 56, it really captures what a perfect essay or what a perfect book should look like, from beginning to end. If you think back to your English classes, just think of how an article or how a book should look like. Number one, it should have an attention grabber, something that grabs your attention right away, that makes you want to read more. And then number two, it has an introduction to the topic, like a clear, concise, short introduction about what the topic's going to be about. And then number three, you want the body or the context, the meat of the whole entire subject. And then four, there's a climax, like a pivot point, at the end. And then finally, the conclusion and the summary. And today, as we're dissecting the surah, you'll see how this is so clear in the surah. It's so amazing. And even when I was in college, when I used to write, I was in a writing class. I used to go back to the surah to see, do I have all my points all together? Because the surah is so beautiful, again, in the way it's formatted. To also start off, before we go into it, the Quran, it's very purposeful in the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has structured the Quran. This is surah number 56 for a reason, and Surah Al-Rahman 55 is before it for a reason, and Surah 57, Al-Hadid, after it is for a reason. So the Quran is very purposeful in the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has structured it. So when you look at Surah Al-Rahman, Surah Al-Rahman talks about so many blessings, and over again the ayah says, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ. Allah is questioning, how can you deny the favors of Allah? And He's giving us blessings one after the other in Surah Al-Rahman. He says, the shajar, the trees, and the stars, and the creation around you, the fruits. Allah Ta'ala has given us so many blessings in this life, in this dunya. But when you go to this surah, Surah Al-Waqi'ah, the one we're going to talk about today, it talks about the blessings of the afterlife, the blessings in the akhirah, not in this life. So they're kind of like mirroring each other. And a lot of scholars say that Surah Al-Waqi'ah is almost a continuation of Surah Al-Rahman. So it's really beautiful where it's put in the Quran. Now to go into the first sentence, immediately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in ayah 1, for those who want to follow, إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ. And in translation it means when the inevitable comes to pass. But when you think of the wording, Allah is using the same root word twice, وَقَعَتْ الْوَاقِعَةِ. It's almost saying when the fall befalls, or when the happening happens. And again, this is like capturing the reader. The people in the Arab world back then, it's like, what is this? What is the waqi'ah? Like they didn't know what even waqi'ah is. So immediately you have this question, what is al-waqi'ah? And before you can even doubt what al-waqi'ah is, the next ayah, the next verse, you can't deny it. It says, لَيْسَ لِوَقْعَتِهَا كَاذِبَةٌ. There's no denying it. So before you can even doubt what the Day of Judgment is, what the waqi'ah is, Allah is immediately in verse number 2 saying you cannot deny it. So again, it's like capturing you and really leaving you wanting to hear more about what al-waqi'ah is. So إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ, al-waqi'ah could mean the happening or something inevitable, the reality, basically all pertaining to the Day of Judgment. After he says لَيْسَ لِوَقْعَتِهَا كَاذِبَةٌ, we can read verses 1 to 6. And again, keep in mind that this is very descriptive. And again, you can realize if a book is good, if by the description. Sometimes when you see a book that's not describing or just like very mundane, you don't want to read it anymore. But when something is just describing and imagining and imagery and analogies and comparisons, it leaves you like wanting more. And this is how Surah Al-Waqi'ah has so many descriptions, so many details. So we'll read verses 1 through 6 quickly. Allah says, إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ لَيْسَ لِوَقْعَتِهَا كَاذِبَةٌ خافضة رافعة إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا. Which means when the inevitable comes to pass, and there will be no denying it. Many are those who will be brought low, and many are those who will be raised. The earth will be shaken to its very core, the mountains will crumble to dust, then be swept away. So Allah is like literally making all of us imagine what's happening on Yawm al-Qiyamah so vividly, and like He's putting us in that moment. It sets you in the mood of what Yawm al-Qiyamah is really like. So again, and that's a way of really grabbing the reader's attention. And then moving on to verse 7 to 12. Now, after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has grabbed our attention, right, in this really powerful manner, just saying إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ, now He's telling us, introducing the topic. And the topic is, Allah says in verse 7, وَكُنْتُمْ أَزْوَاجًا ثَلَاثًا فَأَصْحَابُ الْمَيْمَنَةِ مَا أَصْحَابُ الْمَيْمَنَةِ وَأَصْحَابُ الْمَشْأَمَةِ مَا أَصْحَابُ الْمَشْأَمَةِ وَالسَّابِقُونَ السَّابِقُونَ أُولَٰئِكَ الْمُقَرَّبُونَ فِي جَنَّاتِ النَّعِيمِ, which says, then you're going to be sorted into 3 groups. Some will be called the companions of the right. And who are the companions of the right? Some will be called the companions of the left. And who are the companions of the left? While the foremost will be called the outstanding ones. The outstanding ones will be nearest to God in gardens of delight. So again, this is the gist of what this surah is going to talk about. The 3 groups. And what are the 3 groups? What's interesting is that as Allah is introducing the 3 groups, in the ayah it says, and who is this group? Before you can question, Allah is making you ask this question, because He knows you're going to ask this question. When you're saying وَأَصْحَابُ الْمَشْأَمَةِ وَأَصْحَابُ الْمَيْمَنَةِ, the people of the right, the people of the left, you want to know as you're reading it. And in this ayah itself, it says مَا أَصْحَابُ الْمَيْمَنَةِ, who are the people of the right? So again, it's so eloquent and so powerful for the reader who's reading it. It's leaving you just wanting more continually. So this is what the main topic is. Allah breaks the people in Yawm al-Qiyamah down into three groups: the people of the right, the people of the left, and then the sabiqun, the ones who are first and foremost. And when you think of the word sabiq, it's somebody who wins the race. So those who win the race are the closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's obviously the best place you want to be in Yawm al-Qiyamah. I ask Allah to make us from them, inshallah. Now moving on, before we move on to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the sabiqun, and something interesting story in verses 13 to 14, Allah says ثُلَّةٌ مِنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَقَلِيلٌ مِنَ الْآخِرِينَ, that the sabiqun, the people who are foremost, closest to Allah here says that many of them are going to come from the beginning of time, basically from the time before the Prophet ﷺ. And then it says وَقَلِيلٌ مِنَ الْآخِرِينَ, that few of them will be coming from the time of after the Prophet ﷺ. So Umar ibn Khattab, one of the righteous companions, there's a story that goes that he came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked him, how about us? How are we going to make it from the qaleel, or from the few? And the Prophet ﷺ, it says that he pointed him to the verses that speak of Ashab al-Yamin, the people of the right. And in mentioning the people of the right, Allah says ثُلَّةٌ مِنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَثُلَّةٌ مِنَ الْآخِرِينَ, that from that group, the people of the right, who will also inshallah attain Jannah, that there will be a lot from the beginning and a lot after. So that kind of gave Umar ibn Khattab hope. But also, when you think about it, to be in the VIP elite is never an easy pass. If it was an easy pass, everybody will get there. But that shows that to get to the best place with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it takes hard work. It's not easy. And there's also a story that goes that one time Umar ibn Khattab heard a man saying, Allahumma ja'alni min ibadika al-qaleel, oh Allah, make me from the companions of the few. And Umar ibn Khattab asked him, what is this dua? Why are you asking to be of the few? So then the man replied saying, in the Quran it says, وَقَلِيلٌ مِنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ, only a few are from the thankful. And then also this ayah, وَقَلِيلٌ مِنَ الْآخِرِينَ, a few will be with the elite, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also the people who were with Nuh and Musa, with the prophets, there were always few people. So it's always like the few people who, it's not, so basically the whole point is it's not bad to be of the few. Sometimes when the majority is doing wrong, it's not good to be with a majority. Sometimes if you're with a minority who's doing good, then that's where you want to be. It's not about being with a lot of people. It's not about the quality, it's about the quantity, right? And this is what Umar ibn Khattab understood at that moment. And it's an interesting dua that Allahumma ja'alni min ibadika al-qaleel. I would pray that we're all from the qaleel. And when you think of kathra or Allah, a lot of the times in the Quran Allah says وَلَكِنْ أَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ, right? Most of them don't heed, or most of them don't know. So it's actually something great to be of those few that come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I pray we are from them, inshallah. Now it's going to describe and go into detail into the three groups and their blessings in the afterlife, or what they get in the afterlife. So when it's talking about the sabiqun, the ones who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's very detailed in what they're getting. It's describing in verse number, if you want to follow, 18, it's describing the cups and the pitchers and the glasses they're getting. And when you think about it, in this life sometimes you want like a certain glass to drink water with, or a certain pitcher to drink your coffee with. Like we're picky about what we get. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is like using that for us. Like He knows what we like, as human beings. He's our creator. So He's luring us into Jannah. Like this is why you want to be from the sabiqun. And then He's also in verses 20 and 21, He's saying وَفَاكِهَةً مِمَّا يَتَخَيَّرُونَ, any fruits that they want, وَلَحْمِ طَيْرٍ, and any meat that they pick. So again, it's so descriptive in what they're getting, and it's just leaving you wanting more and more and more. And the way that the people, the blessings of the sabiqun ends is beautiful. In verse number 25 and 26, it says لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما, that they don't hear any foolishness or anything, any sense of criticism, except peace, salaman salama. And how beautiful is this, that and even the repetition of salaman salama, again that goes to show you like the poetry in the surah, like salaman salama, that repetition is so powerful. And when you think of salaman salama, peace, like we're so rushed in this life that sometimes when you're going through hardship and you're going through a hard time, you're saying like, I just want peace, like I just want to be relaxed and want to be free. I just want to rest. And here Allah is emphasizing salaman, salaman, like peace, peace. This is where it is. Like you need to work hard in this life, and the peace will come in the next life, inshallah. So that's something very beautiful in this particular verse. And now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala moves on to speak about people of the right that are also attaining Jannah, inshallah. And He's also talking about the many blessings that they're getting. And in verse 30, he mentions them getting dhillin mamdud, an expansive shade. And in this life, like Allah creates nature around us for us, like whether it's the sun and whether it's the oceans, the mountains, the trees. And can you imagine like sitting on, in a shade of a tree on a very hot summer day? Like, how just beautiful do you feel in that cool breeze under that tree? So here Allah is taking things that we enjoy in this life and telling us, like, you're going to get it, but you're going to get it like times 1,000 in the next life. Well, mamdud, like even the word mamdud, it's like stretched out. It's so stretched out that like you're just like imagining this huge, expansive tree. And it makes you think that like, imagine Jannah to be this huge open field, that you just want to be a part of. And there's even a hadith that pertains to this ayah. The Prophet ﷺ said, in paradise there's a tree under whose shade a rider can travel for 100 years and he still won't be able to come out of it. And then he recited وَظِلٍّ مَمْدُودٍ, this ayah right here, that an expansive shade. So again, like how beautiful is it that, can you imagine a tree that it takes a rider 100 years to go from one to the other? It just gives you that imagery that's so beautiful again and so poetic. Now verse number 33, it's also talking about the people of the right and what they get. And it says وَفَاكِهَةٍ كَثِيرًا لَا مَقْطُوعَةٍ وَلَا مَمْنُوعَةٍ, that they get abundant amount of fruits that never go out of season or diminish. And this is really interesting because how many of us are like in the winter and then we can't wait till next fall for like the pumpkins to come out or the persimmons to come out, or like we can't wait for summer for watermelons to finally be here, the grapes, or even pomegranate and figs. Like there's always a certain season that comes with a certain fruit. But Allah is saying in the akhirah, you don't have to wait for that season. Like you have the fruits at your hand anytime you want. And that's even, sometimes you don't even have to think of it like so, you can think of it like outside of the box. Here, we don't only have to wait to get the fruit, but we have to wait for other things. Like you have to wait to get married, for instance. You have to wait to have kids. You have to wait to finish your degree, to start your job. Like in dunya, we're constantly just waiting, where we have to wait for things. But in the akhirah, you don't have to wait. Everything is just right there in front of your hands. And that's Allah Ta'ala showing us that in these verses, and it's making us want to get there, want to be a part of that group. Now, we spoke about the first two groups. Now Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala goes to the third and final group, the Ashab al-Shimal, the people of the left. And also He's talking about their description of what they'll get in the afterlife, due to their heedlessness and how they disregarded Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala in their lives. But what's interesting is that when He talked about the people of the right and the people who are going to Jannah because they're the closest to Him, the Sabiqun, He didn't mention how they lived their lives. It's almost like you already know, they lived their lives, according to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. But when He's talking about the people of the left, He does mention how they lived their lives. And He says in verse number 47, وَكَانُوا يَقُولُونَ أَإِذَا مِتْنَا وَكُنَّا تُرَابًا وَعِظَامًا أَإِنَّا لَمَبْعُوثُونَ. They had this doubt, this question, like how in the world, basically it says, if we're going to die and crumble to dust and bones, how are we going to be resurrected again? And they're almost like arrogantly questioning Allah, saying, we're going to be bones. How are you going to bring us back to life? And it shows like their arrogance. Sometimes you can ask this question out of, really wanting to know, and sometimes you can ask it out of arrogance, like, that's not going to happen, and this was their way, like even when Allah Ta'ala, and you'll see, answered them, they still chose to ignore, the signs and the proof, and the proof that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala gave them. And now in the upcoming verses, after Allah described the three groups and what they're going to get, He so powerfully answers these people's doubts. And again, like, Allah Ta'ala, sends us the Quran, and it's universal. Not only does it answer the doubts of those people at that time, over 1400 years ago, it's also answering our doubts right now, in this moment. So you can see how the Quran is so universal. It doesn't just apply to one person at one certain time. It can apply to all of us in all times. So here Allah Ta'ala is so powerfully giving us and them, these people who question, rebuttals. And this is what he's going to talk about before getting to the climax of the surah. If you want to follow, basically, if you go to the first rebuttal, if you go to verse number 57 to 59, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "We created you, so why won't you accept the truth? Have you ever thought about the sperm that you throw out? Did you create it or did we? We've ordained for all of you to die one day and we won't be held back from transforming you from one form into the likes of which you can't comprehend. You've already witnessed the complexity of your first creation, so why won't you accept this reminder?" And he's saying, أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ مَا تُمْنُونَ, like, have you seen, like, and even the wording of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's saying, أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ, like, have you seen, like, what you create? Like, you know, when sperm goes into the uterus and then creates this embryo, and then the embryo is now growing into a baby, and the baby comes out and he's perfectly fine and breathing. Who did that? You know, this is what Allah Ta'ala is saying. Who did that? Did you do that? And even the question, أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ, like, did you see it? You saw it, you witnessed it. How dare you question it? That's Allah's tone in this. It's like so powerful, so poignant. You can't deny it. And that's what's so cool about this verse, that he's telling us, like, we created you and there's nothing you did to uncreate yourself. There's nothing you can do to uncreate. So be what? You know what I'm saying? Like, so that's the first thing he says, the creation. And then go to verse 63, and then he makes his other point that was very powerful also. He says, أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ مَا تَحْرُثُونَ أَأَنْتُمْ تَزْرَعُونَهُ أَمْ نَحْنُ الزَّارِعُونَ لَوْ نَشَاءُ لَجَعَلْنَاهُ حُطَامًا فَظَلْتُمْ تَفَكَّهُونَ. And these verses say, have you ever seen the seed that you plant in the ground? Do you make it sprout or do we? If we wanted, we could make it crumble to dust, then you would be left speechless. So he's saying again, like, when you're putting the seed under the ground and you're just watering it, that's all you're doing. You're just watering the seed and that's it, right? Allah is in control of that seed to grow. That's not you. So again, he's seen the second point is the crops. You have no ability over it. That's all Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then again, another point, Allah says, number 68, and all of these are saying, أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ, have you seen? It's like quite making them question themselves, and it's forcing us and forcing them, anybody who's reading this, it's forcing you to use your intellect, because it's asking you a rhetorical question after a rhetorical question that you can't, there's no answer but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically, in these verses. Now, going on to verse number 68, the third rebuttal, he says, أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ الْمَاءَ الَّذِي تَشْرَبُونَ أَأَنْتُمْ أَنزَلْتُمُوهُ مِنَ الْمُزْنِ أَمْ نَحْنُ الْمُنزِلُونَ لَوْ نَشَاءُ جَعَلْنَاهُ أُجَاجًا فَلَوْلَا تَشْكُرُونَ. Have you ever thought about the water that you drink? Do you bring it down from the clouds or do we? If we wanted, we could make it salty, so why aren't you thankful? That's the third thing, the water. Like, how many times have you known people who have had a drought, in history? What do they do when they have a drought? Do they just go call their minister or whatever? No, you see everybody outside begging Allah Ta'ala, praying for rain. That's what you see. So that's what Allah Ta'ala, that's the point he's making. Like, you're not going to have water without me. Like, how can you doubt his ability? And that's the third thing, water. And the fourth and final thing, he says in verse number 71, أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ النَّارَ الَّتِي تُورُونَ أَأَنْتُمْ أَنْشَأْتُمْ شَجَرَتَهَا أَمْ نَحْنُ الْمُنْشِئُونَ نَحْنُ جَعَلْنَاهَا تَذْكِرَةً وَمَتَاعًا لِلْمُقْوِينَ فَسَبِّحْ بِاسْمِ رَبِّكَ الْعَظِيمِ. He says, have you looked at the fire that you kindle? Do you grow the trees that feed its flames, or do we? We bestowed as a reminder and also as a source of comfort for travelers in the wilderness. So now glorify the name of your Lord, the Almighty. Now the fire that you kindle, again, the fire that you use to keep warm, or to provide light at night. Who taught you that the trees are going to create this fire? Who taught you how to even get the fire out of the trees? Who brought the trees? All these questions, and then in the end, Allah says, فَسَبِّحْ بِاسْمِ رَبِّكَ الْعَظِيمِ. When you have no choice but to realize it's from Allah, what do? فَسَبِّحْ. So that's it, glorify Allah and admit that He's in control of everything. So you see the sources of sustenance all come from Allah, the creation, the crops, the water, the fire, and the trees. All these are in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's control, not in our control. And now, after Allah Ta'ala so powerfully, told us, of His abilities and made us realize that we're nothing, that we can't do anything without His rahmah and His control. Next, He gives us the climax of the surah before concluding. And he's already talked about the three groups, in detail. He's introduced them, the three groups on Yawm al-Qiyamah, on the Day of Judgment. He's went through them in detail, and now he went through the rebuttals of the doubts that people have, and now he's leaving us off with this extremely powerful message in verses 75 to 80. He says, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسَمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ كَرِيمٌ في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون تنزيل من رب العالمين. And I swear by the setting of the stars, and that's a mighty oath if only you knew, that this Quran is an honorable one. It's preserved in a protected book that no one can touch but the pure. It's no less than a revelation from the Lord of all the worlds. So here Allah is swearing by the placement of the stars. And when you think of somebody swearing or taking an oath, immediately you think of something grand, like just yesterday in Congress when people had to swear and take an oath. What is that? What does that, imply? It implies there's something grand going on. There's something real that we need to see. And here Allah is taking an oath, and then He mentions the Quran. And what's interesting is that He takes an oath by what? The placement of the stars. The nujum, the placement of the stars that we see outside, and then He's introducing the Quran. Okay. So what do the stars, the placement of the stars, have to do with the Quran? If you think of it, what do the stars serve in our life? The stars are the light in our darkness. They navigate us. And in the Quran it says that لِتَهْتَدُوا بِهَا, that we use the nujum, the stars, in order to be guided by it. Like to orient yourself where you are in north, west, south, and to get navigated and to show you light in darkness. And just like that, but even more, the Quran is our light in times of darkness. The Quran and every ayah in it is like the stars of our soul, the stars that can get to our soul, that can light up our soul and our heart. So just like we need the stars at night, for navigation, we need the Quran in our lives to navigate us to where we need to go. And just like the stars guide us, the Quran even more so is our guidance for our entire lives. So that's one very interesting point by Allah Ta'ala mentioning stars and then mentioning right away the Quran. And also just like, the stars are not randomly put. Allah Ta'ala so precisely put each star in its place. And just as He did that, He precisely put the Quran and every word in its place, every ayah in its place, this whole surah in its place, so perfectly, even more so than the stars. So it's just amazing how Allah Ta'ala has that qudra, has that ability. And one other thing to realize is that He mentions the stars as guidance, in the Quran, and then He also mentions the Quran as guidance throughout other surah in the Quran. And again, just like the stars guide us, at night, the Quran is supposed to guide us throughout our entire lives. It's our ultimate source of guidance. And you can also ask yourself, and I asked myself this after going through the surah, and then Allah mentioned the Quran after mentioning the three types of people. I started asking myself, what does the Quran have to do with the three types of people that Allah mentions, in this surah, on Yawm al-Qiyamah? And basically, the Quran is what distinguishes you from each group. If you want to be in the elite of the elite, the ones closest to Allah, you have to use the Quran as your navigation in your life, or else you're not getting there. The Quran is the tool that distinguishes each person from where they're going. When we use that as our guide, then inshallah we'll never go astray. And this is the whole point of this surah in the end, and how it just, Allah swears by the stars, and then He goes into the Quran and He says, this is what you need to be of the elitists, to be that MVP, to be the VIP in the surah and on Yawm al-Qiyamah, inshallah. One thing that's interesting is that, like we mentioned in Surah Al-Rahman, Surah Al-Rahman is talking about the blessings in this life, right? And then Surah Al-Waqi'ah is talking about the blessings in the next life. And the Quran can tie this life to the next life, because the Quran is our source of guidance in this life. In the blessings we get in Surah Al-Rahman, it's our source of guidance in this life, but then it's our safety net in the afterlife. So the Quran is present in both worlds. We need it in both worlds. And when we're, in our grave by ourselves, and we hear our family and our friends, we hear their footsteps leaving, our only friend that will stay with us in the grave is the Quran. So this is why we need to make the Quran our ultimate companion. Whenever we're in a dark place, we go to the Quran for light. Just like when you walk outside and you see the stars, when you're in a dark place and you see nothing, you need to go to the Quran, and that's your source of light in your life. Now, if we go to verse 79, and this is also talking about the Quran, but in verse 79, Allah is saying, لا يمسه إلا المطهرون, that nobody can touch it but the pure. So I just want to touch on this for a second, because some scholars use this ayah that they say you cannot touch the Quran except if you have wudu, and that they say this is the hukm, like this is the reason for it. But when I was reading and diving into what this ayah really means, I actually saw that most scholars agree that this surah is not really physical. It's not saying that you can't physically touch the Quran, but they're saying you're not going to be able to even get to the Quran, or even you're not going to be able to use this Quran unless you abide by it. Like you can't even get close to hearing the Quran unless you're abiding by it and using it as your guide. So it's more like, are your actions in sync with the Quran? Because if they're not, then you're not going to be able to get to it. Basically, it's not just physically. So it just shows us that we need to make the Quran our guide in our daily lives. Now, before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the conclusion, He gives us more powerful statements and gives the people who were doubting Him more powerful statements. In verses 83 to 85, He says, فَلَوْلَا إِذَا بَلَغَتِ الْحُلْقُومِ وَأَنْتُمْ حِينَئِذٍ تَنْظُرُونَ وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْكُمْ وَلَكِنْ لَا تُبْصِرُونَ. He's saying, if you're so strong, then why are you helpless when a person chokes up his soul at death, while all you can do is stand around and watch? We're even closer to Him than you are, though you don't see it. So again, Allah is leaving these people who are doubting Allah's abilities with one final call. Like, look, even on somebody's deathbed, if you're there, if you're at the hospital and they're resuscitating him and you're doing everything you can to save this person's life, if Allah willed that he dies, he will die. That's it. You can't do anything. And Allah says you can be watching him, you can be doing anything to save him, but you won't save him if Allah Ta'ala has written that he dies that day. Again, so Allah, like He told us at the beginning, He's controlling life, but He also controls death. So He controls everything around us. So He's almost giving these people who are reading this surah one last chance. It's like, come on, like Allah is in control of everything, and how can you doubt that? And now the conclusion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is concluding, and He says, mentions the three groups again in verses 88 onwards. He says, فَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُقَرَّبِينَ فَرَوْحٌ وَرَيْحَانٌ وَجَنَّةُ نَعِيمٍ وَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ الْيَمِينِ فَسَلَامٌ لَكَ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ الْيَمِينِ وَأَمَّا إِنْ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ الضَّالِّينَ فَنُزُلٌ مِنْ حَمِيمٍ. So here Allah says, and so for whoever is amongst those nearest to God, there will be rest and satisfaction with gardens of delight. Whoever is among the companions of the right, peace be upon you from the companions of the right. While whoever denied the truth in error, his welcome will be muck and roasting flames. So when Allah is describing the people that are foremost close to Allah Ta'ala, He's saying فَرَوْحٌ, and Rawhun is like this raha, this ultimate like satisfaction, like you have this ultimate satisfaction of no more tiredness. In this world, they say this life is dar ibtila, the place where hardship is. And the next life is Dar Jaza, where the reward is. So Allah is saying, you want to get there, you can get there, but just keep going and know that there is going to be reward. There is going to be rest for you, inshallah. Just get there and use the Quran as your tool to get there. And then when He describes the people of the Yameen, He says, فَسَلَامٌ لَكَ, peace be upon you. Like, you have nothing to worry about, basically. So again, He so beautifully sums up the last three groups on Yawm al-Qiyamah in this surah. So this surah basically, and then in the last ayah, it says, in the last two verses, إِنَّ هَذَا لَهُوَ حَقُّ الْيَقِينِ فَسَبِّحْ بِاسْمِ رَبِّكَ الْعَظِيمِ. So to all you who have doubts, this is the truth. And what's interesting is that there's so much emphasis, again in Arabic and poetry, إِنَّ, verily, هَذَا, this, لَهُوَ, verily is, حَقُّ الْيَقِينِ, not just truth, a certain truth. Truth in itself is certain, right? But Allah is again saying a certain truth. He's describing truth to be certain here because it's giving you the emphasis. Like Allah gave you so many reasons to come back to Him. So He's telling you, إِنَّ هَذَا لَهُوَ حَقُّ الْيَقِينِ. This is the ultimate truth. فَسَبِّحْ. Again, one more time, Allah says, what do you do with it? When when you submit yourself to Allah, what can you do but fasabbih? Do tasbih. Glorify Allah. Fasabbih bismi rabbika al-azim. And this is how the verse ends. And again, we talked about how the Quran is so purposeful. When Allah ends fasabbih bismi rabbika al-azim, do tasbih, the next ayah starts off as sabbaha lillahi in Surah al-Hadid. Like you're doing tasbih when you read Surah al-Hadid. So again, like there's this Quran, the way it's worded is just so beautiful, so on point, so precise in its placement. Whenever you read the surah from beginning to end, one thing you leave off of is asking yourself this one question, and it's, which group do I want to be a part of on Yawm al-Qiyamah? So we all know Yawm al-Qiyamah is coming, it's inevitable. إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةُ, it's inevitable. What group do I want to be a part of, and how can I make the Quran help me get there, to the group that I want to get to? And I'm going to leave you off with this hadith. It says that the Prophet ﷺ said that if you read this surah every night, then poverty won't touch you. So if you think about, like, this surah is so rich in meaning, and when you read it, that you won't be poor. Like, and just take this out of it. Take this, that if you hold on to the Quran, then nothing can shake you. In hard times and in tough times, anything, when the Quran is your source of light, when you're navigating through life with the Quran, then nothing can take you down. So I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us from those who hold on to the Quran as a source of navigation, and to be from the sabiqun, the VIP, inshallah, to make us from the qaleel, the few that get to where we want to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to clear all of our doubts, inshallah. Ameen. Jazakumullahu khairan.